It's the 16th meeting of the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. We're here today in order of reference of Monday, February 10th, C-23, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and other acts and make consequential amendments to certain acts. And we're fortunate to have the Minister here with us today. We will be having an hour of questions and answers with the Minister. The committee will then go, we'll have some committee business to do. Mr. Christopherson will have the floor on his motion in public after we finish with the Minister for the second hour. So, Minister, yes?
Yeah,
Mr. Lemmer.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I did want to actually get a better understanding, and I would look for your thoughts on this. You know, typically, my understanding in terms of process has been that you have a steering committee. The steering committee comes up with a number of thoughts in terms of the days in which we will meet. the times we meet, the invitation lists, and when the whole process would get underway. And I think that that is something that is really important. We need to recognize that we're doing something somewhat different here.
Okay, Mr. Lamoureux, we have the minister here for an hour, yes, and there will be speaking spots in that hour. And the second hour is committee business on the steering committee. So I'm going to ask you to hold your thoughts and come to us in the committee business part. We know during this study we'll need to speak to the minister. We have him here today, and I know that there's many people here who would like to hear that.
I know, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I would love to hear from the minister too. You know, I welcome the opportunity. I have a lot of problems with what the minister has done here. There's no doubt about that in regards to the legislation. We have a number of questions. We want to see a lot of amendments brought to the legislation. My concern is strictly in terms of process. You know, we could have asked the minister to have come on Tuesday. There was no agreement between the three political parties that the minister should even be appearing here today, that there would have been another alternative date. We were led to believe, or at least one party was led to believe that, in fact, we would be canvassing outside of Ottawa. We hear in the news reports that that's not going to be taking place. We've begun the process.
Mr. Lamoureux?
Yes.
When we last met, there was consensus. It may not have been a unanimous consensus, but there certainly was consensus to proceed in the way we are. To have the minister here today, there was even thought of having a second witness. We're not able to provide that today. So in the method that this committee has always used in moving forward, we will in the second hour spend our time talking about, as a steering committee of the whole, how we'll move forward.
Okay.
If you'd like to use your time during the questioning of the minister to talk about that, I can't stop you from doing that. But right now, we have a speaker's list and we have a minister present. So I'm going to recognize Mr. Butt as the first questioner of the minister.
Okay. If I can just conclude 30 seconds, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker.
If you,
conclude
Kevin,
on 30
it's
seconds.
not that I just believe you can do it in 30 seconds, but you've never proven me that you could.
That's right. So just, Mr. Chairperson, just so that we are under the understanding we'll hear the minister, and then after hearing the minister, the objective would be then we would go back to the normal process and set the perimeters in terms of the future of the of when this committee will in fact be
we will start that by,
and that would be
Mr.
your assurance.
Christopherson has a motion on the floor.
Yes.
It's been so moved. He will get to speak to his motion, and we'll start the steering process with that.
No more meetings with other presenters until that issue has been resolved then?
Well, that will be up to this committee. This chair doesn't make those independent decisions. Minister, great to have you here today. I suppose you have a bit of an opening statement and you have some guests with you I'd like you to introduce. And so please, if you'd like to do that, carry on. We'll go to Mr. Butt as our first question.
We have here Matthew Lynch and Isabel Mondu. They are two officials from the Privy Council office, and they will be helping with any technical matters that, with which the committee may need assistance. As for an opening statement, I'd rather maximize time and accountability for questioning, so I have no opener.
Super. Thank you, Minister. That's always helpful for the committee to give them more time to talk, to some at least. Mr. Butt, would you like to start off 7 minutes, please?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Minister. Excellent to have you here today. I'm glad that we're going to have lots of time for questions and answers on both sides of the table today. Minister, you may be aware that prior to me getting elected to Parliament, I was for 12 years the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Greater Toronto Apartment Association, and the members of that association were owners and operators of multifamily apartment buildings throughout the Greater Toronto area. I certainly heard anecdotally from members that often when voter information cards are mailed into apartment buildings, residents will, of course, go to their mailroom. They will open up their mailbox, pull out whatever's there. A lot of it is often flyers, but also the voter ID card, or the voter notification card, as I prefer to call it, because it really isn't identification. It is a notification card, is often discarded in the mailroom, in the garbage can or in the blue box, as the case may be. And I have heard anecdotally that individuals have subsequently come into those mailrooms. They have grabbed those voter notification cards, and presumably for a reason, I assume, to use those cards to vouch for an individual who would then go and vote in place of the real voter who was the tenant in that unit. Therefore, I'm very concerned about the vouching system, and I think it needs to be cleaned up because I think these kinds of abuses do take place. By changing the system as you have proposed in the bill, Minister, do you agree that this, as an example, is one of those things that we will see rectified because the voter notification card will also have to be accompanied by a proper piece of identification in order for that individual to exercise their vote?
You've touched on two issues. One is vouching and one is the use of the voter information card as a form of ID. Let me address the latter first and the former second. The voter information card draws its information from the National Register of Electors, on which 1 in 6 names have false information. It follows that 1 in 6 cards then are false. That allows for people to vote either more than once or in places where they do not live. We saw an example of this in the Quebec television show Infoman, where 2 Montrealers received 2 voter information cards each. They each voted twice. And they called it the Elections Canada 2-for-1 special. Canadians voted for many years without using the voter information card as a form of ID. It has been piloted in recent elections by Elections Canada. Due to the inaccuracy in the lists on which the card is based, we are ending the use of that card as ID. The card will still be available to inform electors of where they vote. They just won't be able to use it as ID. There will continue to be 39 pieces of acceptable identification that Canadians can use to identify their person and their address. On to vouching. I've regularly cited the statistic that in 4 ridings audited by the Neufeld review, there were a 25% rate of irregularities when vouching was used. If you look nationally, the same report found that there were irregularities in 42% of cases where vouching was used. 120,000 vouching incidents occurred in the last election, and there were 50,000 irregularities. It's been suggested more recently that these were small matters, failure to cross T's or dot I's. That, in fact, is absolutely false. And if you'll permit me, Chair, I'll quote directly from Elections Canada's own compliance review. Errors that involve the failure to properly administer these procedures are serious. The courts refer to such serious errors as irregularities, which can result in votes being declared invalid. It goes on. Too frequently, the errors are so serious that the courts would judge them to be irregularities that violate the legal provision that establish an elector's entitlement to vote. On page 10, it says, nonetheless, the case found that elections officers made many serious errors in their duties on Election Day in the 2011 Etobicoke Centre election, and the Supreme Court made it clear that such errors in other circumstances could contribute to a court overturning an election. And if I could quote right from the Supreme Court, in recognizing that mistakes are inevitable, the court does not condone any relaxation of training or procedures. The CEO has an obligation to ensure, as far as reasonably possible, that procedures are followed. Failure to live up to this mandate would shake the public's confidence in the election system as a whole and render it vulnerable to abuse and manipulation. Those are very serious words from our Supreme Court directed at the CEO of Elections Canada in the aftermath of mass irregularities. We are going to end these irregularities by ending the use of vouching and voter identification cards to voter information cards to ID voters. Thank you.
Under a minute, Mr.
Well, then just as a supplementary, Minister, can you give us a couple of examples of some of the 30 8 pieces of identification. You don't have to give them all, obviously, but some standard ones that most Canadians probably would have that they could bring on the day of voting to vouch for who they are?
Yes, there are student ID card, provincial, territorial identification cards, liquor identification cards, credit and debit cards, public transportation cards, the CNIB ID card for the blind, firearms possession and acquisitions, status cards for First Nations, attestation of residence issued by the responsible authority of a First Nations band or reserve. The list goes on and on. There, one of the following issued by the responsible authority of a shelter, a soup kitchen, a student/senior residence, or long-term care facility. These are just a few of the many examples of acceptable ID that will continue to be allowed under the Fair Elections Act.
Thank you very much. We'll switch now 7 minutes. Mr. Christopherson, I think you're going to share, but we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. Minister, you'll appreciate that in the making of laws that there's 2 main components. One is the actual substance of the law being proposed and the implications of the changes. The second one is, in a parliamentary democracy, the process that we use to amend our laws. So there's the substance of the law, and then there's the process. I have to say, Minister, that on process, you've already got a democratic deficit. You did not consult with the Chief Electoral Officer beforehand, notwithstanding your little welcome, nice to meet you, how you doing meeting. For the best of knowledge, I'm not aware that you had any kind of consultation, private or public, with groups across Canada. This was all done from within inside the Conservative world. And then sprung upon the people, rammed it through the House, and then said, in justifying ramming it through the House, that the reason is it's okay to do that because we do all the real hard work here at committee. We have asked, given the importance of this bill, for some cross-country hearings to get outside the safety of the Ottawa bubble, the political safety of the Ottawa bubble, and get out and let people have their say about their election. Minister and Chair, this is a substantive piece of legislation. It has significant implications for our democracy. We have serious concern that there may be around 120,000 Canadians that could lose their right to vote as a result of these changes. We're very concerned that these changes will bring big money back into Canadian elections. And we're concerned, seriously concerned, about the muzzling, the apparent muzzling of the Chief Electoral Officer, among other concerns. And all we've asked for, in terms of process, you call it the Fair Election Act, we're looking for a fair process. And it looked like we might have some sunlight on this subject. Negotiations started, but they abruptly ended, and the government said, no, they're not interested. So given the fact that this Parliament felt that it was important enough, and we agree it was, in 2012 for the Foreign Affairs Committee to go all the way to Ukraine to study their democracy, that it's equally important here in Canada that we take the time and the money to study our own democracy. Not only that, in terms of arguing that it's too much money, we just approved the other day, notwithstanding our refusal to allow it to go through the House, but the committee approved travel for the Trade Committee to go to 10 cities across Canada and the U.S. So, Minister, my question to you is, and it's a very simple one, why are you refusing to consider hearings outside the safety of the Ottawa bubble, and why are you denying Canadians an opportunity to have a say about their election process in the communities where they live?
Well, I'm not. The committee is the master of its own destiny. It can hear any witness that it wants. I would encourage you to put forward a full list that is representative of the entire country as you consider the viewpoints of Canadians from across the land before this committee. And I will leave it to you as the assembled members of the committee to determine where you hold those hearings. That being said, you did make some comments about the consultations with the CEO. You weren't at the meeting, but it was not just a, hi, how are you? I listened for about an hour to the CEO's suggestions until, in fact, he ran out of things to say. I told him if he thought of anything else, he should give me a call and that we could talk further. I also read his many testimonies before this committee and reports, which are publicly available, and took them into consideration in adding 38 of his recommendations to the substance of the Fair Elections Act. That is, I think, a very comprehensive consultation. And furthermore, we'll look forward to hearing input from the many witnesses that you'll bring before you.
Well, Minister, first of all, if I can, Chair, to correct my own record, it was the Transport Committee, not the Trade Committee, just to be accurate. I want to say, well, let me ask the Minister. I agree it's the committee's purview to decide whether we should go outside Ottawa. Let me ask you the question directly then. In your opinion, would it be a more democratic and healthier process for Canadians if we took these committee hearings outside of Ottawa? Your opinion?
That really is a matter for the committee to decide.
Oh, so you're dodging, Minister, and I got to tell you, this is just consistent with what we've seen. I have the floor. This is consistent with what we've seen so far. We are definitely concerned that a serial cheating government is trying to pre-cheat the next election before we even get to it. And all we're seeking at this stage is an opportunity for Canadians to have their say. The minister can be as cute as he wants, saying that it's the purview of this committee, but we all know who's calling the shots. And if this minister and the Prime Minister said there will be public hearings outside Ottawa, there would be. They're shutting this down, and it's not a process that we're willing to accept, Chair. Let me just last say, we want to get off the process issue. This is not where we want to fight. These are serious issues. We want to get out into the communities and talk about the bill, but we need a fair process. Ramming electoral changes through the House and then through this committee is un-Canadian and unacceptable.
There's a minute left. Did you want to give it to Mr. Scott? Okay, Mr. Scott, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. I was wondering if I could go straight to an issue that's caused some concern, which is the current Section 18 of the Act, which you've replaced or want to replace with a new version that's very tight and excludes, in its own language, excludes any other public education activities other than what's listed. You've suggested some openness, and my question is, why would you not be open to retaining the current Section 18, which has all the public education functions that has led to things like Democracy Day and the Student Vote Program, and then layer in on top of it your specific informational duties that you want the Chief Electoral Officer to undertake? What's wrong with having the two side by side?
Clearly, the public advertising and outreach campaigns of Elections Canada have not worked. Since they came into effect, voter turnout has actually plummeted. And the problem is even more persistent amongst the groups that the campaigns purport to help. I did some research into some of the practical obstacles to voting that exist in Canada and found that many of them are very practical. 60% of non-voters say that everyday issues got in the way of their casting a ballot. Those include everything from being out of town on Elections Day to being too busy to cast a ballot. Those are two problems that can easily be solved with advance voting. The problem is that half of young people are not aware that they can vote in advance of Elections Day. It's a number that rises to 3/4 when you talk about Aboriginal youth. And as a result, I think we need to advertise those basics of voting: where, when, and what ID to bring, and what special tools are available to help the disabled cast a ballot.
Thank you, Minister. I gave some extra time there to the answer to your question. So we'll be careful on asking those compound questions with 2 seconds left, and not expect me to cut the witness off. We're going to go next to Mr.
I understand,
Sims.
Mr. Chair, that was the problem.
7 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'm going to start with a compliment. How's that? When the debate started, you were there and you stayed throughout the whole thing. Not every minister does that, and I want to say thank you for doing that. You put up your argument as best you could. I want to go directly to the point of what the Commissioner, as well as the Chief Electoral Officer, asked for prior to this bill, which is the ability to apply to a judge to comply testimony. We know that in Section 11 of the Competition Act, this exists. So it exists on paper. It also exists in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Alberta, Yukon, for their election officials to be able to compel that testimony. And to me, that seems to be the one key tool that they were looking for. So, but you keep talking about independence. You wanted the independence for the commissioner to do its job, but if it doesn't have the very tool that he asked for, it can't be done. So even though you're taking that person from Elections Canada and you're putting them into the Public Prosecution Office, without that key tool, this is an exercise in, not independence, but this is an exercise in isolation. Because at least when he was with Elections Canada, he could just go down the hall, he could talk to the auditors, he could talk to deputy returning officers all across the country, because that was the only way really that he could find out what's going on, because then they could raise flags. But when the flags were raised, he was within that building. He was within that construct of Elections Canada. Now, if you want to take that person and put him over into public prosecution with the very tool to be able to do this, I think that would have been probably the best thing to do. So it's not a question of ordering the referee off the ice. You certainly took his whistle from him, which made him ineffective, or you never really gave him a whistle in the first place. And second of all, now he is off the ice. So don't you think this is more isolation than anything else?
Not at all. In fact, the Fair Elections Act will continue to permit the Commissioner to ask information from Elections Canada or any of its officials. None of those powers are removed by the Fair Elections Act, nor does the new legislation prevent Elections Canada from providing information to the Commissioner. They can have a free line of communication one to the other. Well, the independence we provide is to allow the Commissioner
but Minister,
to control
if I may,
I just finish answering. It was a very long question. The answer is that the Commissioner will have the ability to manage his own staff, run his own investigations, and he can do so without fear of being fired because he'll have a fixed term for the first time.
Well, sir, but how often does that happen, really? I mean, to do his job effectively, obviously he has to be within the confines of this to find out what is going on. Like, look at the frustration that happened during the robocalls affair, you know? I mean, there was obfuscation, they were blocked, they were so frustrated. This is the very reason why he brought it out. I don't think by taking that person, putting them into a different office with separate you know, in a separate place, that you say that there is an open line of communication, but there really isn't, unless he has the ability to go after people. You said that police officers do not have this ability, but your party vehemently argued for the ability to wiretap, to listen in on conversations. Vehemently, you defended that. You wanted to make that better. Well, the reason why you did that is because it gave that person the tool to investigate. But it's not a question, quite frankly, you haven't made him neutral, you've made him neutered without that tool.
Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the Fair Elections Act gives the watchdog sharper teeth, a longer reach, and a freer hand. What does that mean? Sharper teeth means tougher penalties for existing offences. A longer reach means that he'll have dozens of new offences to impose. And on that particular point...
Can I address those three things?
No, because I'm not finished. The reality is that the Commissioner will have a new offence that he can impose, which is anybody who obstructs his investigations or lies to his investigators will be committing offence under the Act, one that can be prosecuted. And that will allow him to cut through the obstruction that so worries you. But you raise the issue of police powers to compel. Police do not have that power. Police who are investigating the most heinous violent crimes cannot force someone to speak.
But I just illustrated
a
point where they did.
The Commissioner has all of the same powers of investigation that a police officer would have. The Commissioner can...
So why is he wrong when he says he wants more?
The Commissioner...
Why is he wrong? Specifically, why is he wrong? I've only got a few minutes left, Minister. Yeah. Why is he so wrong
the power
for asking what he wants?
The power that the Commissioner has to seek information is already present under the existing Act.
Then what did he ask?
He can ask a judge for a warrant to obtain evidence, and after charges are laid,
After charges are
he
laid.
can ask.
What about before charges are laid?
The testimony can be compelled in the court of law. That's the way it works when investigators in police investigations carry out their work for much more serious crimes than you're discussing here. And the reality is that he has these tools, and we're giving him more under the Fair Elections Act.
Okay. Can the police go beyond before charges? Do they have the ability to listen into conversations if they feel that you and I are up to no good? And don't you think that an investigator with Elections
That's
Canada...
not what you're asking for. That's not what you're asking for.
But
now
that's
you've
what
changed
they're
the
asking
subject.
for.
But you've changed the subject.
No, I have not.
You were on
No,
power
I
to
have
compel
not,
a minute
because
ago.
this is what they, in order for them to
what
get
are
to
you
the
asking
bottom
for,
of a scandal
wiretapping or
for
power to
robocalls,
compel?
I'm asking for what is in Section 11 of the Competition Act.
Which is not wiretapping.
Which is exactly. But it's the power to compel for evidence, the ability to investigate effectively. Wiretapping is about police doing their jobs.
So are you talking about wiretapping or the power to compel?
About them doing their jobs.
You're going to have to decide what you're asking for, because a minute ago you were asking for the power to compel testimony. Now you're talking about. Now you're asking for the power to wiretap. So I don't know exactly what your policy proposal is.
I'm asking for the ability to investigate before charges are laid, which is what you're not providing in this legislation.
That's completely false. The commissioner has the power to investigate before charges are laid. That's what he does for a living.
To compel evidence, to apply to a judge. If the judge does not feel...
Thank you, Mr. Sims.
If I could conclude, he can compel evidence by getting a search warrant right now.
Thank you. We will go to our 4-minute rounds. Mr. Lukiski, you're first.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Minister, for being here. Before I begin with you, Minister, I just want to make a comment based on what my friend and colleague David had said about the process. Following your presentation here, we will go into the second hour of this meeting to deal with process. It will be in public. I hope that I have an opportunity to talk about process, David, and if you want to take the entire hour yourself, that's up to you, but I would certainly like to present the government's position on whether or not we go on cross-country tours. So hopefully I'll have that opportunity. But, Minister, to you, and I have to tell you, I was not planning to ask this question until recently. I planned to ask you some specific questions on provisions in the Act, but I have to tell you I'm very concerned about a newspaper report that I saw recently, and it was in the Ottawa Citizen. I don't know whether it's accurate or not. I see some of our colleagues from the media here today, so I'm assuming that...
Everything in the newspaper is absolutely accurate.
That's what I was just about to say. I was just about to say. But this concerns me because it's a story about Monsieur Méran, the head of Elections Canada, who apparently was giving some form of a speech to his employees, the staff members at Elections Canada, and apparently railing against the government, complaining about the Fair Elections Act. And it almost sounded, the way I read the article, it was almost like a campaign-style speech to rally them up, to get them angry at the government. I could only interpret that as being, in my mind at least, political activism. I may be wrong, but it certainly appeared that way to me, and I just want to know whether or not, if I interpreted it correctly, whether that, in your opinion, is appropriate for the head of Elections Canada, which is supposed to be impartial and deal with all political parties and all candidates impartially. Whether you think that was appropriate?
Well, listen, I don't take these things personally. In politics, emotions can run high from time to time. I haven't read the speech, and so I won't comment on its substance.
Okay. Now maybe I can get back to a question on the provisions itself. How are we? 2 minutes? Thank you very much. One of the complaints, I guess, or the criticism that the NDP opposition has is on the plans to take away vouching and do away with the election ID card. They feel that's going to disenfranchise, I think David said, 100 or 200,000 people. Well, of course, there's two options. One is to present a government-issued photo ID with name, such as a driver's license. That would be the most common. And the other, of course, is the 39 other options, where 2 of which of those 39 would be sufficient. On the driver's license itself, my colleague Blake Richards has pointed out, according to Statistics Canada, less than 2% of the Canadian population does not have a driver's license. So I'm wondering, I mean, if you want to comment on that, I cannot see, for an example, where there would be anyone who voted in the last election who would not be able to vote in this coming election if our new provisions came in, yet they're saying that we're going to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of people. And I just like a comment.
Well, there is, I have to say, there's a startling lack of knowledge about in the public about the ID that is required. A lot of people a lot of very informed people wrongly think that you require photo ID. For example, the leader of the Green Party, who I consider to be very informed on political matters, having run in campaigns herself, was under the impression in a public letter she published recently that one needs photo identification to cast a ballot. In fact, that's not true. It is an option, but not an obligation. Elections Canada provides a second list of eligible identification that includes 39 different options, and this lack of knowledge is important, and it's something we try to fix through the Fair Elections Act. Through Clause 7 of the bill, we are amending Section 18 to require Elections Canada inform people of the forms of identification that are required. The goal there is to ensure that people show up at the voting location with all the information that they need, including the ID. And I think that will help solve some of these problems.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. We'll go to Madame Latz-Andresse, please. 4 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming, Minister. We appreciate that you've given us as much time as possible for asking questions. We have a lot of questions for you, and there are a lot of things we'd like to cover today. Personally, I'm very concerned about youth voter participation. That's always something that's been of interest to me. I have some questions about that issue because I carefully listened to most of your interventions in the House. I listened to your speeches, and you often said that the bill is going to help voter turnout. But often when you say that, I feel like we're going back in time because what I see in the bill is not about that. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there were student polling stations for students and back in the last election, and they used their voter ID card to vote. Now you're getting rid of that possibility, so young people will no longer be able to use this measure, which was a pilot project back in 2011. Are you aware of the impact, the negative impact that this will have on youth voter turnout in the next election? I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question, but I do not agree that this will reduce voter turnout, particularly with respect to young people. Why? Well, as she said, young people, students, voted without using this voter ID card for many, many years without any problems. Secondly, there are 39 other ways to identify yourself, including the student card. I have a list here that I could share with you. And finally, the Elections Canada had to inform young people about the type of information, the ID that they needed in order to vote. And I think that this will help out. They will be aware of what documents they need. I'm aware of all of that, Minister, but when you repeat that there are 39 pieces of ID that people can use, could you tell us specifically how many ID cards can be used on their own? Well, the 39 pieces, how many? But how many pieces can be used on their own? It depends. Driver's licenses, health cards, provincial ID cards or territorial ID cards, that's it? Those are already available. That is one option. But I have to correct you. I have to correct myself. That's not all, because there's another option as well. This second option is that you can use 39 other pieces of ID, and I have the list here before me. When I was a student in Rimouski, I got my driver's license late. So when the minister says that fewer than 2% of Canadians are without a driver's ID, I wonder about that. There are a lot of people who don't have an ID. It can really vary from one place to the next. And when you're talking about young people, obviously they're the ones who have the least number of least likely to have a driver's license. And when you say that you can use a student card to vote, well, that's not realistic for a lot of young people who don't have any proof of residence, so they won't be able to use their ID, a student ID, in order to vote. But at any rate, I have other questions that I'd like to tackle. I would like to add that's not the only document that a student is acceptable. The student could also use correspondence from a school, university, or college. There are 8 other ways that the student can identify themselves. But that's not going to improve voter turnout. But it's not by enabling students to use an unsafe way of voting that's going to do it either.
Move to Mr. Richards for 4 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today, Minister. I've got a couple of questions. Hopefully we'll have time for both. I think we all remember the 2006 Liberal leadership campaign when many of the candidates in that race used political loans to be able to circumvent the donation limits. And in some of those cases, the candidates still owe money to campaigns that ended almost a decade ago now. So I wonder if you could tell us if and how the Fair Elections Act closes that loophole and helps to keep big money out of politics, and if you could also address whether, in fact, those provisions in the Act would be retroactive and whether they could actually be applied to the individuals who still have debt from those 2006 campaigns and what the Elections Canada might then be able to do to force repayment of those loans.
I'd like to begin, if I may, Mr. Chair, by putting the present situation in context. Under the present law, the Commissioner of Canada Elections has the power to investigate anyone who has used loans deliberately to circumvent donation limits. That would be a clear offence under the existing Section 497 of the Canada Elections Act. Now, Elections Canada rightly points out that failure to repay a loan does not necessarily prove intent, and therefore is not automatically an offence under the Act, although it is a non-contravention. It is a non-compliance. It is non-compliance with the Act. However, Elections Canada does have all the powers to investigate whether these Liberal leadership contenders deliberately used loans to circumvent donation limits. And it remains to be seen whether Elections Canada intends to carry out such an investigation. That being said, the changes to in the Fair Elections Act will close this loophole altogether, so that people cannot use unpaid debts to circumvent donation limits. It does this by requiring that borrowers use recognized financial institutions or political parties, that they have commercial repayment plans and interest rates, and that it does become an automatic offence after 3 years of non-repayment. Now, that provision is not retrospective. It will not apply to past incurred debts. However, for those who do have outstanding debts, we are giving them some flexibility in repaying them. They will be allowed to collect donations from previous donors as long as they do not exceed the annual donation limit, and those provisions will be retrospective. In other words, existing past incurred debts can be reimbursed through this change in the fundraising side.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. I think most people in this room know that the riding I represent is a large rural riding, and one of the challenges sometimes can be in some of the smaller communities finding appropriate polling stations. One of the reasons shared to me by the previous returning officer of my riding was sometimes finding a proper place where disabled people are able to have proper access to the polling station could be a challenge in some of those communities. And I know that one of the changes being made in a Fair Elections Act is actually going to require the CEO to communicate with people with disabilities to ensure that they know what voting stations are available to them when they get to the polling station. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about why that's necessary, and whether you, in fact, met with representatives of disabled individuals and discussed the development of that with them, and ensure that it was something that would be well applied to ensure they had the proper access and knowledge of where and how to vote.
So I'm going to ask Mr. Opitz to see if the Minister can answer the question on his time.
Minister, if you wouldn't mind answering that question, go ahead.
I think the system provides excellent tools to help disabled people vote right now. The problem is a lot of disabled Canadians are not aware of those tools. And so often they decide not to go and vote out of concern that they won't be able to cast their ballot upon arrival. That's a concern that I heard from organizations like People First, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. You know, it's not helpful to have Braille services if a visually impaired person doesn't know that they can acquire those services. So the Fair Elections Act in Clause 7 will require Elections Canada inform the disabled of the special tools available to help them vote. That measure has been applauded by the Canadian National Institute for the Blind and others, and I think that it will be helpful in encouraging turnout among Canadian disabled people.
Minister, you have something here that I don't think anybody's touched on yet, and I apologize, I'm still getting over a bit of a cold. The Advisory Committee on Political Parties to the CEO. There's a provision there where they would meet once a year to be able to talk to the CEO and give him guidance on issues, and he would provide guidance back. Can you discuss that?
Yes, the Advisory Committee of Political Parties already does exist. This will create a legal recognition of it, and it will require the CEO to consult with this committee when he changes his interpretations, so that parties can provide some input on the impact that those changes will have on their operations. I think this is a practical, non-binding tool that will allow political parties and the CEO to exchange information, make good decisions and rulings.
There's also a section that provides better customer service. It refers to. Now, I'd like a little better definition on that. To me, that means that it makes it easier and clearer and fairer and more convenient for people to vote. Can you describe that concept within the Act?
Yes. Canadians, 2 million Canadians voted in advanced ballots in the last election. That's very positive. A lot of people are busy on Elections Day. We want to give them as many opportunities as possible to vote early, and that's why we're adding an advance ballot day, so an extra day of voting for all Canadians to use. We're also going to require Elections Canada to advertise that advance voting day so that people are aware that it exists. Finally, we are going to allow Elections Canada more resources to provide officials who can relieve congestion at busy voting stations, and that will make it for shorter wait times and less confusion when people show up to cast their ballot.
Okay. On the delineation between terms of reference between the CEO and the Commissioner, can you describe, sir, how that is going to improve the overall voting process and the conduct of Elections Canada as we conduct elections in Canada going forward?
Well, the Commissioner is in charge of investigations. The CEO's principal responsibility is to run elections. And I think that it would help the CEO to focus more on that core mandate. Anybody who's read the Neufeld report will realize that there were very serious irregularities in appallingly high numbers in the last election. 165,000 serious errors committed by Elections Canada under the CEO's leadership, and I think that we can only improve on that by focusing, if he focuses on that core mandate.
Yes, thank you. Your time is complete. Mr. Scott for 4 minutes.
And if I could ask Mr. Lynch or Ms. Mondeau to have a look at page 219 of the new bill, have a look at 509.4 and .6, and I'd like to come back to that before the end of my question, so it's a very technical question. For the Minister, the new Section 20 of the Act basically says the Chief Electoral Officer may engage on a temporary basis the service of persons having technical or specialized knowledge, but it goes on to say that to appropriate the funds for that, he has to get Treasury Board approval. That's Section 20 of the Act. So, Minister, could you confirm that this provision now means that Elections Canada would no longer have the independence to commission such reports as the Neufeld report that you like to cite, or as the Institute for Research and Public Policy study on robocalls that was instrumental in putting together the Chief Electoral Officer's report on deceptive calling. The need for the approval of the Treasury Board is something that I'm very concerned about in terms of inserting the government between the Chief Electoral Officer and his ability to carry out studies.
I don't think you're referring to Section 20. You're referring to Section 5094.
No, I asked, please, would you, Section 20 of the Act, of the new Act, is the question.
Well, the new Act doesn't have sections. It's because it's not an Act yet. It has
would
clauses.
You answer the question, please? You know what I'm referring to. Treasury Board approval for hiring commissioner specialists, such as Neufeld.
Yes, you're referring to Clause 20. I think.
Clause 20 in the new Act.
Yes.
Section 20 in the new Act.
Right. So Section 20, you're relating to there's something called the deputy head of any organization. Right now, the deputy head for the purposes of staffing and contracting is the CEO of Elections Canada. We're making the commissioner independent of the CEO of Elections Canada. Let me finish. And that will make the commissioner his own deputy head for the purposes of the Public Service Employment Act. However, for the purposes of the Financial Administration Act, the deputy head will be the Director of Public Prosecutions. And as a result, he will play the functional role that is currently played by the CEO of Elections Canada with regards to contracting.
My question was about the Chief Electoral Officer's ability to hire specialists with only with Treasury Board approval. I asked Mr. Lynch to be prepared for a second question, which you're dealing with, and you're not actually answering it. The first question is Treasury Board approval to hire the Neufelds, the Institute for Research and Public Policy, all of those. Is that correct that you now need the President of the Treasury Board's approval for the Chief Electoral Officer, not the Commissioner?
I'll let the official comment at that point.
The proposed amendment to Section 20 and Clause 10 is with respect to technical or specialized services, such as support for computer systems, for example, very administrative support for the organization. It's a standard clause that's used in a number of different statutes, including for other agents of Parliament. And the role of the Treasury Board is to approve the person's remuneration and expenses, not the contract itself.
Exactly. And so the point is that the Treasury Board approval is needed for those kinds of temporary contracts.
I would point out that the Treasury Board's approval is also needed for the payment of election officers. So
okay.
It's not unusual.
Then the last question is for the Minister. I'm going to skip the technical question because we got into it earlier. Are you aware, Minister, that the Neufeld report recommended the expanding of the use of voter identification cards?
I am aware of the recommendation. I'm also aware of the data, and I appreciate the excellent work that Mr. Neufeld did in providing that data. The reality is that Elections Canada has acknowledged that 1 in 6 people on the National Register of Electors have false information associated with their names, and that false information then flows onto the voter information card. We cannot have voter information cards that have errors 1 in 6 times used to identify voters at the polls. It is too susceptible to abuse, and that's why we're removing that form of ID.
Thank you very, very much. Mr. Reid, 4 minutes.
Mr. Chair. Several years ago, to be specific, on April 27, 2006, Jean-Pierre Kingsley, who was then the Chief Electoral Officer, appeared before this committee. I was a member then, as I am now, and I drew to his attention the fact that in the 2006 election, which was then a recent memory, I had received 3 voter cards at my address, one addressed to Scott Jeffrey Reid, that's my full name, one addressed to Scott Reid, and one to Jeffrey Reid. So, strictly speaking, there were no errors made, but I had 3 cards. I could have voted with one, if it was accepted as ID, at the returning office, with one at the advance poll, with one at my local poll. They all are staffed by different people. An inadvisable approach for someone who's actually a member of Parliament, but the point, I think, is made that these things are not reliable identification. In a later election, a provincial election in all fairness, my wife and I, who live, of course, in the same house, received voter cards, hers using the rural route address, which is in one riding, mine using the street address in another riding, so the result was that we were actually told by the cards to vote in different ridings. So I concur there are problems, and I've experienced these myself. I wanted to raise two issues. One is really for the CEO, not for yourself, Minister. The question about how many people have driver's licenses. The really relevant question is there's 39 pieces of identification. What percentage of Canadians have none of those? And if so, that will not be a random cross-section of Canadians. It will be a specialized group who for some reason are in an unusual situation. I'd like to hear his response as to has he gone through and looked and tried to identify people who, like the senior citizens living at mobile polls in Etobicoke Centre, were unable to vote because the vouching system did not allow them to vote, and it did nothing for them, and who also had no ID. But here's the thing I wanted to say to you, Mr. Minister. Regarding your meeting with the Chief Electoral Officer, I would have been very upset. He submitted a very lengthy report and recommendations to this committee. We reviewed it at great length. I would have been very upset if at that meeting he had come to you with any recommendations separate and distinct from those, and I would have been even more upset with you if you'd produced a bill based on his private recommendations to you that do not correspond with his recommendations made to the entire committee, which were passed on to the government for you to follow through. So I just want to go on the record as saying that you got plenty of input from him via this committee and did the right thing. I may disagree with individual things in the bill, but you did the right thing by coming back and dealing with it in the normal manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on your point, Mr. Reid, related to voter identification, voter information cards, excuse me, I think one measure in the Fair Elections Act that will help deal with election day confusion, and which was identified by Mr. Neufeld, was increasing the number of people who have pre-registered by having their names added to the list. Section 18B of the Canada Elections Act will read upon its amendment that the Chief Electoral Officer will provide information on how an elector may have their names added to a list of electors and may have corrections made to information respecting the elector on the list. And that is a very important tool for reducing complexity and confusion and wait times on Election Day. If people are on the list when they get there, they don't need to register when they arrive to cast their ballot. This provision will inform Canadians of the simple ways that they can have their name added and their information updated if it is not already there.
Great. We have a reduced amount of time left, so I'm going to go a 2-minute round, starting with Mr. Wachowski for 2, and then Madam Latson-Jess, and that'll finish. So it'll be you, Mr. Scott. Great.
Thank you very much. Minister, I'll just go back to a comment I made in my earlier intervention. I want to see whether you concur or not. It's certainly something I think is true. Although the opposition seems to think that this new bill will disenfranchise a great many people, over hundreds of thousands of people, I would think it would be almost impossible to find anyone, or at least very few people in Canada, who voted in the last election that would not be able to vote in this election under the new provisions in the Act. Would you concur, or at least would you be able to give comment on that?
Well, look, I'll give you an example of the knowledge gap that exists. Elections Canada did some surveying of youth who decided not to cast a ballot, and a quarter of them said that not knowing where, when, or how to vote played a role in dissuading them from doing so. The Fair Elections Act will ensure that those young people have that information, among which includes required ID. And I think that will mitigate the problem of knowledge gap that has dissuaded young people and the population at large from casting a ballot. So we have 39 forms of identification that will continue to be allowed, and if Canadians know what those are, they can very easily prepare themselves for Election Day. Thank you.
30 seconds. Fine. Mr. Scott, 2 minutes.
Thanks, Tom. Just go back to clear up the confusion with Mr. Lynch. Could you give me an answer on Section 509.6? The new, what would be in the new Act is 509.6. And the simple question is, with a certificate of the DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions, can the Commissioner hire investigators and other specialists on a temporary basis directly from the Consolidated Revenue Fund, because it's not mentioned that the provision section 509.4 is not specifically mentioned in 509.6, and it's just a clarification. I'd love the answer to be yes, and I'm wondering if it is.
Yes, if you refer to 509.6B, refers to any expenses incurred by, on behalf of, or in relation to the Commissioner under this part.
It's included in that, in your interpretation. Okay, that's all I need. That's very good. For the Minister, Section 376 of the new Act is the clause dealing with exempting fundraising calls to pre-existing donors who've given $20 or more. I'd love to ask you what the $20 or more is about, but what I really am concerned about, apart from the advantage it gives to parties that have the extra money to be running full ramp, these kind of voting operations have established voter-donor bases. That's obvious to everybody. My question is, the wording of this provision, in your view, does it allow a party to make calls where they simply add in an ask, where they say, oh, by the way, could you please donate? And at the same time, the purpose of the call is getting out the vote or asking to volunteer or persuading somebody to vote?
No, that is not a concern. And it is based, I've heard some other public commentary that is also false on this point. And I'll have to break it down, though, Mr. Chair, with your permission. First of all, the number of donors a party has is a tiny fraction of the number of supporters it has. So if a party was just to call identify its donors to ask them to vote, they would be doing a get out the vote enterprise of a very, very tiny fraction of their overall support base. Furthermore, they'd be calling the people that they least need to call. Donors are the least likely to miss voting day. They're obviously civically engaged enough to give of their own money. They're going to give of their own time to vote. But I could just finish, if I could finish on this point.
You're both going to finish because you're over time. So.
If I could just finish on this point. To think otherwise is to conflate two completely distinct and different functions of a campaign, voter turnout versus fundraising. I would also add that the NDP had a very similar rule in its leadership race, and I can quote from it right here.
We heard that in the House. You're over time.
This is my listen. He asked the question. I want to give the answer. It says here that expenses for fundraising are not subject.
Come on. Come on.
Well. If I could finish, I know the NDP doesn't want to hear its own rules, but those rules state that any fundraising.
Thank you.
If I could finish, I've been interrupted 4 times just trying to read one sentence.
But
a silly argument, but he's
interrupting the chair when he's trying to say thank you, Minister, for coming today, and thank you for giving us all the information you can.
Thank you very much.
Have, and thank the whole committee for its politeness and how well it went today. We'll suspend just for a minute while the minister gets a chance to leave, and we'll come right back in. We're back to business now, please. We will be recognizing Mr. Christofferson. He has a motion that he has moved, and so he's up. Obviously, we're now in a committee of the steering committee, so let's see if we can get towards the rest of the study. Mr. Christofferson, your show.
Thank you very much, Chair. There we go. That one. I appreciate. We are in public.
We're in public.
Good stuff. Just want to be sure. First off, appreciate the understanding that we were able to come to at the beginning today. That's good. It'd be nice if that kind of goodwill would continue and we could actually get somewhere. Chair, if I may, I think it would maybe be appropriate to just restate the motion that's in front of us so that we can provide a context for my remarks. I moved that the committee, upon receiving an order of reference from the House concerning C-23, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and other acts, and to make consequential amendments to certain acts, initiate a study on this legislation, which will include the following: hearing witnesses from, but not limited to, Elections Canada, political parties as defined under the Canada Election Act, the Minister of State who introduced the bill, which we've just done, representatives of First Nations, anti-poverty groups, groups representing persons with disabilities, groups representing youth advocates and students, as well as specific groups which have been active in society on election rules, including Fair Vote Canada, SAMARA, S-A-M-A-R-A, Democracy Watch, and the BC Civil Liberties Association. That the committee requests to travel to all regions of Canada: Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Ontario, Northern Ontario, the Prairies, British Columbia, and the North, as well as downtown urban settings such as the downtown east side of Vancouver, and rural and remote settings, and that the committee requests that this travel take place in March and April 2014, and that the committee shall only proceed to clause-by-clause consideration of this bill after these hearings have been completed, with a goal to commence clause-by-clause consideration for Thursday, May 1st, 2014. That, Chair, is the motion. And if I might, on the components of the motion, let me jump to the last point first, because I think it's important. Normally, an official opposition wouldn't box themselves in by putting an actual completion date. But we did that for that very reason, to show how serious we are about this proposal, that we're not looking to hijack the process or to be obstructionist per se, or to lull the government into some process where we don't get a bill passed in time for the next election. None of that is our objective at all. And that's why we took the unusual step of saying that if we can travel in March and April, which we believe there's plenty of time to do, then we would be quite comfortable committing ourselves to starting the clause-by-clause May 1st. And once we get into that process, for those who are watching, the government majority control then takes over. Once we start getting into clause-by-clause, the ability of the opposition to do anything from a procedural point of view is very limited. Notwithstanding extraordinary measures, but by and large, the government's majority at that stage in the process pretty much assures them that they can control all the way through to completion. And we know, because we can do math, that in a majority government, the government's going to win votes 10 times out of 10. We get that. We're not trying to take away the government's ability to govern. We are trying to minimize their ability to reign. Governing is one thing, reigning is another. And I have to say, Chair, that watching the government in the House bringing in the hammer of closure within a day or two of the bill being introduced, did not suggest to us that the government was interested in allowing real democracy to take place as you would under a governance structure, but rather they just want to ram through whatever they think the rules should be for all of our elections. And there's not much democratic about that. Let me also say, if I can, Chair, you know, I've been in politics a long, long time, and people who know me know that not only will I not, you know, avoid a political fight like my friend from Winnipeg Centre, from time to time I enjoy a good political battle. You know, I see my colleagues laughing, so my understated point, so Mr. Reid is questioning it, of course, tongue-in-cheek, and I knew that would, of course, be the reaction. Fair enough, fair enough. But the fact remains that we'd much rather be fighting over the content of the bill, given its importance. And I appreciate that nobody's sort of heckling that point, because we have gone out of our way to try to keep the focus on what matters. And what matters is ultimately the election laws that we have in this country. But as I said in my opening remarks to the minister, it's not just the content of the bill that defines a democracy, but the process around which you bring that bill into law and give it the force of law in the land. And that's important in any case. But, Chair, we would submit that it means even more when it's our election rules, our election laws. You know, in the past, Chair, it's how far we've gone away from what parliamentary democracy is supposed to be. It used to be, back in the day, that a government, majority or otherwise, wouldn't dream, would never dream of introducing wholesale, massive changes to our election laws without consulting with the opposition. Yeah, as shocking as that sounds, back in the day, our democracy used to be so healthy that when it came to deciding the rules of the game, it was understood that we can't have a fair game if we don't all agree on the rules. I mean, we're watching the Olympics happening right now. The first thing that happens before anybody puts on one piece of equipment is they agree on what the rules are going to be. And the people who host the Olympics didn't get to set all the rules. It wasn't the Russian Federation that came in and said, here's the rules of the Olympic. It was done through a process. I'm not an expert on the committee, but the International Olympic Committee, I believe, ultimately has the say. But lo and behold, that's made up of component parts of the countries that participate in the Olympics. And they would no more allow one country or the host country to ram through the rules than they would consider canceling the Olympics. Of course we have to agree. And yet, here's the Minister of Democratic Reform, conservative Minister of Democratic Reform, defying democratic gravity by saying that he's going to have a Fair Elections Act with an unfair process. And that's why the resistance from us, Chair. It really isn't because we want to fight around process. Quite frankly, it doesn't take too long before the public just kind of glazes over and says, oh, here they go, inside baseball. I see my colleague, Mr. Butt, agreeing that when it comes to process, people aren't that engaged. However, I do think it's fair to say, and I hope Mr. Butt would agree with this, Chair, that Canadians like to think that there's fairness happening in this process. And because we have representative government, they aren't sitting around this table to express their concern. That's our job. That's our job as the opposition, to make sure the system is as fair as possible, the process. And I say right now, Chair, and at any time in this process, until we have some kind of an agreement, if
the Deputy House Leader wants to talk publicly, offline, texting, smoke signals, any way he wants to convey that they're prepared to compromise, then I'm signaling we are receptive to that, because this is not the fight that's important. It's not the primary fight as we see it. The primary fight, as we do see it, are the issues that we're raising and the concerns that we have about the damage that will be done to our democracy. But we can't have that kind of fair discussion, or fair fight, if you will, if we don't have rules and a process. And what kind of extraordinary, unbelievable, horrible demand are the official opposition and the other opposition representatives making? All we want is the opportunity for Canadians to have their say. Now, the government has said no. They marched into the first meeting saying no. They marched out of that meeting saying maybe. 3 hours later, we were back to no. We sit here again, receptive and willing to negotiate. Somewhere between no and our motion, there should be the ability to come to an agreement. We are flexible. I said that. I'm not going to breach confidentiality in terms of the discussions I had with the Deputy House Leader, but I do think it's fair to say that what we were outlining was a willingness to engage in a discussion, and I knew that we were going to have to stand down from where we are a little bit, put a little bit of water into our wine. But in order for that to work, the government's got to do the same thing. And that's kind of where we are right now, Chair. And as yet, the government is not being fair. Let's remember, the minister consulted with nobody. I didn't have a lot of time to go back after the minister on his answer, but I mean, you could only puff up a 1-hour hi, how are you meeting and call it a consultation so far before it starts to look utterly ridiculous. And that's how the minister looked. Absolutely ridiculous. I used to be a minister provincially. I remember what you do in the early days, and you do a touch base and a hi, how are you, with all the various components that make up the portfolio that you have responsibility for. But I'll tell you, the first time I met with the OPP commissioner and had our little hi, how are you, I didn't consider that to be a strategic goal-setting meeting to decide where the future of the OPP was going. It was hi, how are you, and getting to know each other. That's all that happened with the chief electoral officer. Think about it. In one of the most progressive, modern, mature democracies on the planet, a country that's held up as a model by many others in terms of what they want to evolve to. We have a 244, help me, Professor, what's 244 page? I mean, look at this thing. It's massive. It's like 244 pages. Yeah, 244 pages of changes about our election laws. And I think it's reasonable that most Canadians would look at that and say, okay, I'm not in politics, I'm certainly not a minister, and I've never made bills, but it does make sense to me that if you're going to change the election laws, the foundation of our democracy, I mean, it's hard to find something that's more important than the foundation of our democracy, that the first step for a new minister in particular would be to have a serious, comprehensive consultation process with the chief electoral officer. That's what we did here at this committee. I want to remind members, Chair, and you were there through thick and thin, every meeting. We spent, it was 2 or 3 parliaments, I don't know, 3, 4 years, going through recommendations, wait for it, from the chief electoral officer. It was a huge document, very detailed, very comprehensive, and we looked at that. Now, that was in minority, and that's the stark lesson here. In minority, the Conservatives had no choice but to cooperate. Otherwise, they couldn't do anything because the rest of the parties held the balance of power. So, what did a real comprehensive review, and by the way, there's a report of the Chief Electoral Officer coming out of the 41st general election. I'd be shocked if that was even referenced in the Hi, how are you meeting. But my point is that at the time that we were looking at changes, the first place we started, in fact, Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, but the document that we used as our reference point, if you remember, we had lots of documents because there was so much detail. This stuff's complex. You need legal opinions. You need experts in the field. I mean, so that document, the document that was the centerpiece of our work, was the report and recommendations of the Chief Electoral Officer. And it took us multiple parliaments, multiple years of goodwill, negotiation, and discussion to conclude that report. I think we did finally conclude it. We did, but it literally, I'm not exaggerating, it was 2 or 3 parliaments and in almost as many years. That's the report. That was the starting document. This is from the Chief Electoral. And what does it say at the top? Mapping of the Chief Electoral Officer's recommendations report. And then it goes on. And there's the value, talks about the subject, the current status, the recommendation, the desired outcome. Page after page after page. And we spent hundreds of hours. Goodwill discussions, some of the most interesting and challenging and enjoyable debates that I've had since I've been here. Why? I would say in large part because we didn't have one party with a majority who considered it to be a nuisance to listen to the other members of Parliament from the other parties. That's the way it seems right now. But back in the day, when we were doing real work and really working together, we went through this piece by, and this is the beginning document. I can show you files this thick, multiple files of documents. We would have the Chief Electoral Officer come in. We would have legal experts come in. They would go away. We would talk back and forth, get to some stuff. We'd get to a finer point. We'd bring them back in to get into the detail of all that. We did really good work. And the Hansards are full of my compliments to my colleagues in terms of the approach, the maturity, the really good political parliamentary work that was being done. So what happened? What happened? Well, what happened was the government got a majority, and turns out that a lot of their talk about wanting to clean up politics on the coming off the heels of the sponsorship scandal that the Liberals were embroiled in, this government ran on a platform of, oh, we're going to be clean, we're going to be accountable, we're going to be transparent, we're going to have all kinds of accountability. Canada will never have it so good under a Conservative government in terms of the strength of our democracy. And they got elected on that platform. And since then, all they've done is insult and degrade our democratic process step by step by step by step. Until now, we have a bill that, in our view, allows serial cheaters to pre-cheat the next election. Now, the government is saying that's not the case at all. Not an unusual dynamic. That's when the issue of a fair process kicks in, Chair. When the opposition members have very strong feelings and concerns about what is in a bill. And the government is responding to the opposition saying, no, 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 you're fear-mongering, you're exaggerating, or you're just simply wrong. Your arguments don't hold at all. Well, you know, there's some countries in the world where that really is the end of the debate. There is no further discussion, and should you start expressing your disagreement, you find yourself with a knock on the door at 3 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly you no longer are around. Now, one might say, come on, we're so far from that. Yes, we are. We are so far from that. But why? not just because we're Canada, not just because we say so, but because we pass laws and conduct ourselves in a way that our citizens believe they are part of a democracy. And not just any old democracy, one of the best in the world. Remember, if democracy was easy, everybody would have it. And a parliamentary system, unlike a presidential congressional system, let alone any autocratic systems, is not a governance structure of reigning and ruling over people, which is the sense that we get ever since this government got a majority. It's like, we got a majority government, that means we can do whatever we want, any way we want, we're the government, and anybody that gets in our way, they're clearly the problem, and whatever we do to get them out of the way is okay because we're doing all the right things. That is not the attitude of a democracy, and certainly not a parliamentary democracy. I mean, we have gotten so far away from what the basic foundations of how a parliamentary democracy works that in some ways it's working against us. How many times, colleagues, have we heard the sitting the sitting president of the United States of America say that he would give anything to have the powers of a majority prime minister in Canada? They run everything. And let's remember, this is a government that got less than 40% of the vote and 100% of the power. Where's the basic democracy in that? I won't go down that road, Chair. I'll save you that speech for another day, but it does speak at the end of the day to proportional representation being the next step in a evolved, mature democracy. And that's one that we're still struggling for. But, boy, we're so far away from that kind of progressive thinking in terms of just defending decent, fair rules right now that remains a dream that hopefully will start to unfold after the election in 2015 with an NDP government that will bring in proportional representation. But I digress. But I digress.
Scared a lot of people.
But I digress. The fact remains that the first step should have been that consultation with the Chief Electoral Officer. That didn't happen. So you say to yourself, well, okay, maybe that was a mistake or an oversight. I'm sure he would have sat down with one of the key stakeholder groups in the issue of democracy in Canada, and that's Fair Vote Canada. You know, I mean, they're not exactly wild-eyed radicals. You know, they care about the details of democracy. No, the minister didn't meet with them. All right. Well, what about our concerns about the implications of some of these changes as they might affect our First Nations people and other Canadians that live in the far north? Voting in the far north is very, very different from voting in downtown Toronto. If I might, Chair, I know a little of this. I'm sure you'll recall that I've done 6 or 7 international election observation missions, and sometimes I'm out in the villages in some of these countries, and I've seen firsthand the challenges they have. They're not unlike ours. When you're remote, you're further away. In many cases, they have other challenges, but it's surprising how similar they are. There was no consideration. How many First Nations leaders did they talk to? None. How many Northern leaders? None. Other groups that we're concerned about that will be disenfranchised. How many of their representative groups did the national minister meet with? None. Who did the minister? Did the minister meet with anybody outside of the conservative world? Not that we know of. Give me a break. Give me a break. There is nothing fair or democratic about this process. This is an abuse of majority power. And I remind this government, it's a majority that came from majority of seats that came from less than 40% of the people who went out and voted. So you would think that they'd be a little more respectful of the fact that they have a majority, but they got it through the barest means possible and in a way that underscores our need to change our process. I was part of a government that got elected with less than 40% of the vote and had 100% of the power. And I'm saying it's unfair. I agree. How in a democracy can 40% vote give you 100% of the power? How can that be? And yet it is. And yet it is. So, the very least that we ask for on behalf of Canadians that care about this is just an opportunity to go and visit them where they live and where we think there are concerns. Chair, it makes you wonder, what is it the government's afraid of? Is it that their bills and their arguments hold up here under the safe political security of the Ottawa bubble? Because it's all just arguments and debate? Is that what they're worried about? Is that what they're afraid of? That if we go to the far north, that they're going to be faced with a stark reality that puts the lie to their argument, that this is not going to disenfranchise? Is that what they're afraid of? I don't know. Are they afraid that, oh, there might be a demonstration or two? Oh, there might be a protest sign that somebody that's upset with what's going on with the Senate, or somebody who's upset about robocalls, or somebody who's upset about the in-out scandal. I mean, there's lots of democratic reasons for Canadians to be upset with this government. So, might that happen? I don't know. Maybe. But so what? So what? It's a free country. A couple people with a placard or you know, making a minor demonstration outside the meeting room. You know, seems to me that's kind of one of the good things about living in Canada, is that we have the right to express ourselves. If I, you know, as a Canadian citizen and there's a meeting going on and I have something to say about that and I want to stand outside with a little bit of a sign that says whatever I want it to say, and it's, you know, perfectly legal language, but it makes a political statement. I remind colleagues, it's not a joke, and some of my friends have family that have been from those countries, where you hold up that sign and it's the last time you're ever seen. How far away from that are we when we've got a government that refuses to hold a public meeting out in the community because they're afraid to face those signs? I mean, we're not that far away from it. We maybe didn't arrest the person that had the sign just because they had a sign, but just because they had a sign, we won't hold a meeting there. So whether the government is afraid that their arguments won't hold up when we actually go out into the communities where people live, that when we go to downtown East Side in Vancouver, that when these members are faced with the stark reality that they feel they can't defend it then because it's too real, that it's not just arguments here in Ottawa, that it's yes, of course. Thank you.
Yeah. Just wanted to know if I missed anything important.
Oh, yeah, I can repeat it for you, because it was all really important. Where did you leave? I can start that again.
Sorry, David, you go right ahead. I'm just kidding. Sorry for the interruption. My apologies.
I think it was the part where you said, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman. I think that's where he left off.
Is that where he left? Okay, well, see, no. There was this document, that document, this document. No,
I love our camaraderie, but carry on.
Thank you. No, Speaker, Chair, I do appreciate that, and I you know what, I appreciate the levity, and I enjoy working with Mr. Lukiski and Mr. Reid and others. I am. I can't speak for the rest of my crowd either, but I like working with them. No, but and quite, you know, Chair, that this was the dynamic that existed. In fact, it was. I was the lead at the time, and Mr. Lukiski was the lead for the government at the time, and this was exactly the kind of dynamic that happened. We do like 20, 25 minutes of serious work talking through the election rules, because we're all affected by them. And nobody was trying to get an upper hand. It was a really good exercise in watching democracy in a positive way, actually getting something done. And read the report. There's a lot of work went into that. And so this is what we want to do. This is really where we'd rather be, is dealing with the substantive matters in this kind of tone, Chair, with respect for you, and that you, are you signaling something?
I've been saying enough about how good the chair was during that last study, but you can carry on.
Okay, good. Well, I know where my bread's buttered, Chair, and I will certainly sprinkle those deserving compliments. No, but it's true. There was a lot of compliments about the way you chaired it, because There were no marching orders from anybody to from anywhere to anyone. We really were independently sitting here as members of Parliament, elected by our constituents. We elected you as our chair, and you were fair-minded. You moved us through. There was respect. And then we also recognized our own, like we put in our own deadlines, and we made sure that as much as possible we moved along. And I come back again, Chair, to the beginning when I said that the official opposition was trying to indicate good faith by putting in our motion something that opposition parties rarely do because it boxes you in. Government's already playing off it a little, saying, well, rather than ending on that date, we'll start on that date. So again, I'm just pointing out why you don't normally do that, because it gives you political problems. But in this case, what was important to us was to signal to the government, not so much anybody else because it's inside baseball, but we were signaling to the government that, look, we're not playing silly bugger here. We're not looking to trap the government into a process where they can't get the bill out. This guaranteed that wouldn't happen. So why would we waste time in the March and April not doing constructive things when we've built in our own deadline? I mean, I don't know how we could have sent a more positive signal to the government, Chair, than this motion. That is entirely reasonable. And it looked like we were getting somewhere. It looked like there was actually some possibility of movement. When the government asked if we would allow them a little time to consider, and in a trade-off for that consideration, would we consider having the minister? You know, we started the process. And I don't think I'm violating any confidences. People saw it on TV. Tom and I had started the discussion, some of it on the floor of the House of Commons, some of it out in the hallway outside the House, but we had started. And we had even set out the fact that we had until this meeting to get to an agreement if we could. So we started early, left ourselves lots of time. The usual respect that Mr. Lukiski and I have for each other allowed us to have that discussion. And then, and I don't know why, I won't suggest to impugn motives, but all of a sudden I was just informed that, boom, sort of the Conservatives' own version of their Iron Curtain came down, and there were no more discussions. There was no more consideration of compromise. There was no more consideration of negotiations. It was over. Just like that. And that's why, you know, I sit here now as much as in sadness as anger, because the real battle, if you want to call it that, but the real work, the real discussion, the effort we're putting into this process should be going into analyzing this mammoth bill that has an incredible impact on our country, on our democracy. And if the government believes that they can defend all these changes, we have fair rules in our committee with a chair that we respect, who evenly applies the rules, and we can do that. But it's not just this little committee that we're talking about. It's also how many times will this committee meet? Will those meetings be in public? How many experts will we have hear from? Will we have the opportunity to call experts back after we've raised issues? And we're suggesting that another reasonable component of those things I've just mentioned is to go to the places in the country where we have concerns that the biggest negative impacts will happen. The government may win those issues when they come up. One would think that they've thought this through. Our worry is that they have thought it through, but they've thought it through for themselves. Fine. Make the arguments that show that we're wrong. Make the arguments that tell Canadians it's okay, you don't need to worry, you know, the opposition is doing what they do, but it's okay, don't worry. And if they're successful at doing that, then they'll win the day, and people will believe that there was good changes. Because at the end of the day, the government's going to get the changes they want. We get that. They have the majority. They have the power. They get to do what they want at the end of the day. But democracy happens in between. And that's the part that we're standing up for. And that's why I had hoped there might be a signal from the government today even, that they're prepared to start some negotiations. I am saying straight up again, as clearly as I can, we do not want to get bogged down in a debate on process. But we are not going to let this government steamroller the rights of the opposition to raise concerns that Canadians rightfully have. That's not going to happen. So here we are. Here we are dealing with a complex, huge, complex, almost 250-page bill that amends one of the most complex pieces of legislation we have, which is our democracy and our election process. And so far, all we've seen from the government is, A, they rammed it through the House with little or no debate. As soon as they could, they brought in closure. Prior to that, I might remind everyone, there was no proper consultation with anyone outside the conservative world. They used the argument that it was okay to ram it through the House because once we got to committee, well, that's where the real work happens. It's just kind of show in the House. But once we get to committee, that's where we roll up our sleeves and we really start getting some serious work done. All right, here we are at committee. We want to get, here's the opposition saying, let's get some serious work done. So let's agree on a fair process in terms of how we're going to proceed, and then let's get at it. And so the same government that rammed it through the House under the guise of saying we want to get it to committee so we can have a thorough discussion, now don't want to have that thorough discussion. They don't want to give Canadians an opportunity to be heard on their fundamental right of citizenship, which is the right to vote. And so I will constantly be coming back, Chair, to the theme of wanting a deal. I'm an old negotiator. I'm an old auto worker negotiator. I like negotiating. I like sort of the process of getting to yes and compromising, a little give and take. I enjoy the process because my experience in almost 30 years at all three orders of government is that that's really when we get good work done, is when we can come to a compromise, especially on process. And again, this shouldn't be the biggest fight, and it needn't be. It needn't be. What we should be doing is talking about this bill. However, in a parliamentary democracy, there are certain rights that non-government MPs have, and those rights are extended to the official opposition members, the other opposition members, but most importantly in a democracy, it extends to the people. If the people want to come out in their communities and do nothing but sing the praises of the government at hearings in northern Canada, so be it, or Mrs. Saga, so be it. So we're not trying to wriggle, not that we have the power to do it, but we're not trying to get any kind of unfair advantage. We're not trying to trap the government. We're not trying to make some political point that's separate and apart from this. All we want is a fair, honest opportunity to look at this bill and for us to make determinations on what's in the best interest of Canadians and their democracy. And it is possible for us to put a deal together. If we were serious about this, we could do it in less than a half an hour. Within a half an hour of starting negotiations, if both sides were serious, we could come to a compromise. I don't see how an official opposition and the other opposition parties can conduct themselves in any other way and be more fair and more responsible than that. If it was pure politics, we would have jumped up that motion even more. We would not have put the May 1st date in there. And we would be doing political gymnastics to make that happen. And instead, at every minute, every moment I have an opportunity, I'm asking the government to talk with us, to negotiate with us, to find an agreement, get past this process issue, and get on with the substance of the bill.
But, Chair, we do have a responsibility here as the opposition to ensure that all the components are as fair as possible. That's what Canadians expect. They like to think that their majority government, who they placed all their trust in, would take care of their interests, but the system provides, and that's the beauty and the genius of parliamentary democracy. Thank you. The beauty is that it provides an opportunity for Canadians to feel like they actually have a say in their lawmaking. That is one of the hallmarks of a mature, modern democracy. And yet, that simple little ingredient of democracy the government refuses to give. And so as much as this is not where we want to be, this is where we're bloody well going to stay until the government changes its mind and gives Canadians what they deserve. Now, while I have this opportunity, because it's not often we get to talk directly to Canadians, in a majority government, at the end of the day, the government's going to get their way. They got a majority. Sometimes it can take a little longer. We can slow things down. Like we stopped those trips from happening because we said, well, if it's good enough to go out on those matters with those committees and spend that time and money, then we think it's equally important for this committee to get out there. And we don't have too many tools to make our case to the government to sort of, get their attention. That's one of them. So we've removed that. But Chair, you know as well as anyone that at the end of the day, the government still has a means by which they can move motions and use their majority government to get what they want. It's just going to take longer. What we refused was the sort of motherhood housekeeping issue of allowing unanimous consent once it had gone through the proper committees. But our power is, I wouldn't even use power, our ability to affect change when the government has set a course is somewhat limited at the end of the day. However, the nuclear weapon in a democracy is still the people. And I've been around long enough to know that if enough of those government backbenchers get enough contact from enough Canadians that they're upset and that they want this to change and that they want a fair process, that they will report to that minister who will then report to the Prime Minister, and suddenly we're going to get hearings. Because as much as they might want this bill, there's not a one of those government members that's willing to put their seat on the line for it, especially if their constituents agree that they're not being fair. Fair it's not a powerful word, usually. But to Canadians, it means a lot. We accept that there are powerful forces in society. People get to make decisions that affect us. Government has all kinds of power. Take money out of your pocket, spend it any way they want. Pass laws about what you can do and you can't do. But at the end of the day, Canadians will only believe that those laws are theirs if they feel some ownership. If they feel there's been fairness. The government even calls the bill the Fair Elections Act because they know the importance of the word fair to Canadians. So they're trying to co-opt that, and I get it. Done the same thing when we were in government. Fair enough. But what's not fair is to send committees all over North America, all over the world, to study, even to study democracy. I've used the example of the Foreign Affairs Committee that went all of our Vice Chair was part of that delegation that went to Ukraine. Ukraine's an important country. I've done 4 international election observation missions there for presidential elections and legislative elections. I have as much
vested interest and compassion and care and support for the Ukraine as anybody else in this country. I know Mr. Opitz is a leader in our Parliament on that, and I give him kudos for that. He does a very good job, and I know that he would probably have been one of the forces behind that initiative to have us go there, study that democracy, and issue our report. Now, why did we do that? Did we do it just so that a bunch of parliamentarians would have a nice little PROC trip? No. We did it because parliamentarians were going to go there, study the democracy, issue a report, and then lend Canada's voice to the international discussion around democracy in Ukraine. That's why we did it, as a positive contribution to democracy on the international stage, something else that Canadians are proud of. We don't show up with our army, and we can't always show up with our checkbook, but we always show up wanting to help. Well, if we're willing to do all that, as we should, as a G7 country, rich enough to be able to do it, if we're willing to do that for Ukraine, why aren't we willing to do that for Canadians? Why aren't we willing to show, why isn't the government willing to show Canadian democracy and Canadian citizens the same respect that we collectively showed to Ukrainian democracy and Ukrainian citizens? And that's why I can only conclude that the government has calculated that politically it's better to take the hit, the political hit, to live through these moments where the opposition actually gets a chance to have their say. It's easier and better politically to live through all this than to deal with what they think might happen if they leave the safety security of the Ottawa bubble. And that's why I say I think they're afraid. The government, this is a G7 country whose government is afraid of their own citizens. They're either afraid that they can't defend the changes, and so if we're in the north and we're seeing the processes that'll actually be in place, and we have a stark, clear vision that democracy is not being served and that this is hurting those folks, they're either afraid that that's what's going to happen when we get out there. So what's the answer? Well, don't go out there. Stay here. Make it all just an argument, esoteric arguments. It's just, we're all nice and safe in here. You know, we got all the security guards and now all the millions spent on new security. It's all nice and safe here. And we can make these kind of oblique arguments about this, that, and the other. It's very, 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 very different if you're sitting up in the north in a community center with the leaders of the community coming in and telling you hands-on how it's going to disenfranchise their community members. It's a lot harder for the government to say that's not true when it's right in front of them. So I think they're afraid. And if they're not afraid of that, then they're afraid, in addition to, that there might be some demonstrations. What'd the government call them? Circus. Circus. That was what they thought of public hearings that Canadians come out to, and especially if anybody would dare say something negative about our special little privileged little government. God forbid that should happen. And so, what do you do about that? Well, the same way as the other problem, what you do is you don't go there. You don't go there because they can't get the picket signs as close to here. There's lots of rules. They're all nice and secluded and everything's all fine. And, you know, they can manage that. But the idea that they might have to walk through a crowd that are not very happy outside of a committee room, oh, boo-hoo. Boo-hoo. Try being Mike Harris's government when he had public hearings around their labor laws. I was there. There was the circus. There was the biggest circus in the world. I've seen lots of demonstrations. What I have not seen in my years is a government that runs from its own people and hides. That's the difference. That's the difference. And this government seems to think that if there are any demonstrations at any hearings, that somehow democracy is being harmed.
That's their, I mean, they got two arguments. One was they said it was going to be a circus. By the way, outside the elected members, I'm not sure who they thought the clowns would be, but they called it a circus. And yet,
well, no, I want to just point out to my friend David that actually I called it a gong show as well.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
Of course, not the people attending the hearings, which could be here today, just the people that you would organize to try and put on a public face of demonstration rather than hearing expert witnesses. That would be the gong show, but...
Thank you, Mr. Kissinger.
You're very welcome.
No, I appreciate the help because I was looking for a segue to get to gong show, and my friend provided it nicely. But you see, no, let's just take apart what was just said. Let's listen to that. It'd be interesting to read the Hansard to get the exact wording. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the essence of what he said was that all these demonstrations would be somehow what would happen instead of doing hearings. And this is the fallacy of the image they're trying to project. They're trying to suggest that there's going to be such a gong show and circus that no work will get done. Well, that's not true at all, because, Chair, you wouldn't let it happen. You would not let it happen. Oh, sorry, Chair. Do you consider this to be a gong show?
No, I did not say that.
Okay.
You said about getting work done.
Okay. Because I would assume, and I have great faith, that you would ensure that the hearings that need to take place will. And I'd be the first one to say that we make sure, if it's necessary, that we would take all the security measures necessary so that we could have that meeting. But what worries me is a government who suddenly sees this as going into enemy territory and that they got to wear camouflage clothes and go in with combat boots on because somehow their own democracy is going to attack them. I mean, come on. They might be, and there might not even be, but I'm using the government's worst-case scenario of why they won't hold a hearing. There may be some demonstration, but you know what, Speaker? We have demonstrations here on Parliament Hill all the time. All the time we have all kinds of public demonstrations, from a handful to tens of thousands. I'm not aware yet, and I stand to be corrected, but I'm not aware that any of those demonstrations have caused a greater impact on our ability to work than, say, a visit from the President of the United States of America in terms of the disruption that it causes. I don't think it's even that great. Most of the time, Chair, most of the time, when we're in the House or when we're committee and doing our work, somebody's protesting somewhere on Parliament Hill, or they're, lobbying, moving around. There's citizens here. Well, that's all that's going to happen if it happens, is that we go to somewhere, Churchill, Nunavut, Vancouver, and we have our meeting place, everything is all set, and when we arrive, there's some people who had been outside exercising their democratic right to say something, and we walk in and put our books on the table, go get a coffee or a glass of water or juice and sit down, and then we start working. So what the member said is this is the essence of the problem. The image, Chair, that the honourable member said was that there would be all this commotion and therefore we couldn't do our work. And that's what's not true. We can ensure that Canadians can exercise their right to have their voice and say what they think about Canadian politics, Canadian politicians, and Canadian governments. And they will do it peacefully, and they will respectfully allow all members to enter the room and their staff and take their place, and then we do the hard work. That is exactly how it would unfold, how it should unfold, and so it's important. It's important because the government suggests that as soon as there's anything outside the committee room, that somehow negates the ability to do any kind of business. In their mind, maybe, and in their fearful mind, where every Canadian is a potential enemy, I suppose you see it that way. But the fact remains, if you look at it the other way, all we're doing is
Mr. Lamoureux has a point of order.
Yeah, just for my own personal future reference, Mr. Chair, when we do adjourn in a few minutes, is it safe to assume then we would just continue on with the speaking list that's currently in place at the beginning of Tuesday's meeting?
We would start a new meeting with a new meeting.
a new meeting, so it'd be a new list. Can I be put on to that list?
No, not till that meeting.
Not until that. Just so that you're aware, I would like to,
Although we
because
have
I've probably got
we
quite a
do
bit
have
that I'd like
another
to share.
motion besides Mr. Christophers, but we haven't finished his yet. But we do have another motion besides that already that would need to be spoken and eventually voted on. And of course, while I have the floor, we would like to start some strategy as to how we will do this study and talk about when witnesses would come and how many of the 13 meeting days we have until the dates that have been mentioned here would be filled. But I'll go back to Mr. Christophers and let him finish.
Sure. And if I could, Mr. Chair, just to finally,
I also try again.
Sure. I also have a motion, and I guess I'll just provide a copy of it with the clerk.
Table it with us, and then
I'll
we'll get
table
to
it with
it
you.
eventually.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Two things. First is you mentioned 13 days. I would just point out that that's following the usual scheduled meetings that we have. There is nothing in the rules that would prevent us from meeting every day for 2 or 3 weeks if we wanted to. So the 13 days is kind of what's already set there, but that does not preclude us from meeting every day to meet a deadline if we choose to, and work weekends if we have to meet a deadline. So I want to say that. The other thing was I just want to pick up on the point my friend said. It seems to me that right now the committee it's a steering committee. We're now into a steering committee meeting. We're public. We're seized of a motion, and a member has the floor. So when we come back next, we pick up where we left off. The same motion is still before us, and the member that had the floor still has the floor. Is that correct, Chair?
It's not my thinking on it, Mr. Christopherson, although we would, if we came back as a steering committee, we would still have to deal with that too. We do have our regular committee meetings, and that depends on which type of meeting we're coming back to.
All right. Well, it's good that we're on this then. This motion, would you agree that this motion has to be disposed of before you deal with any other motions in this regard?
I would think that would be appropriate. Yes.
So then by extension, that means that this motion is still before us at the next meeting, and if it is, I still have the floor. Would that not be correct, Madam Clerk?
You can ask me, and I'll get advice if I need it. The true answer here, Mr. Christopher, is wish that we would move forward with actual testing.
I agree, Chair, and you can see.
Let's not look for the bleak part. Let's look for the good part.
Fair enough. And in the interim, there could be a change of heart, and we could have a deal, and there's no problem. But in the extreme possibility that may not happen, I just want to be assured that we're not going to get into another procedural fight here about procedures on how to proceed. That the fact is that we still have this motion in front of us, and I still have the floor. I agree, Chair, and I will say again, we want a deal. I would love nothing more than to turn to you and say, which I'm not right now, that I am done. But I am not, and I will not be until such time as we get an agreement. But I need to know that we're not getting into another schmozzle heading into our next meeting. Chair, this motion is duly before this committee right now. I have the floor. I do need the assurance from you, sir, that that is where we are when we come back.
We cannot dispose of your motion until other people on the speaking list also get to speak to it.
Yes.
And, of course, we vote to it.
Yes.
So, Mr. Christopherson, you would immediately be able to put your name on the list and be available after others, if that's the case, too. So let's worry about
Chair, I have a bit of a problem because we have this motion in front of us now. The committee is seized of it.
Yes.
I have the floor. I am in order to have the floor. If we're going to adjourn this meeting and continue, seems to me we continue exactly where we are, given that you have said that we can't deal with any other motions till we've disposed of my motion. Therefore, my motion is the motion that's on the floor at the next meeting when we begin, and I have the floor.
And with all due respect, Mr. Christopherson, I certainly hope we dispose of it at some point and move on to actual business of this committee. But we are finished for today.
You left it unclear again, Chair. That's not helpful.
I just want to say, I mean, procedurally, I tend to agree with David. Certainly the position from here is if David wanted the floor to continue to speak to his motion at the start of the next meeting, we have no problem.
Sounds like you have friends in the room. Yeah. Mr. Lamoureux, what are you going to say?
It's just the rule.
Given the sense of friendship, Mr. Chairperson, I would ask maybe that I would be allowed to follow Mr. David.
No.
Well, we have a motion for Mr. Lukiski in there too.
Not sure when I'll get there.
By all means, Mr. Christopherson, on Tuesday, I'm sure we'll see you here, and I'm sure we'll be discussing your motion, or here or wherever the committee deems it will meet. We are adjourned for today, and sure wish we could move a little more forward the next time we meet.